Good evening. This is Faith Matters, and I am David Hennessy. Today, I'd like to take up where we left off in my conversation of last week with Brendan Walsh. Brendan told us how, when he was barely turning 5, his mother died. Prior to that, life in his family was wonderful. But following his mother's death, his father changed completely. While socially he was well liked and respected outside the house, with his children he was harsh and verbally and physically violent. Financially speaking, they lacked nothing, and their father took a great interest in their being well-read and culturally knowledgeable. But he never had a word of praise or encouragement. His children lived in terror of him. His 3 sisters were farmed out to his aunts, while he and one of his brothers stayed with their father. Their life was a nightmare. Brendan became rebellious and hardened, and even fearless of corporal punishment. He found relief in fighting and developed a hatred of people. To avoid his father, he would often sleep in the shed. When he finished primary school, his father sent him to boarding school, but during the first year he suffered an attempted molestation and refused to go back to school the following year, but would not tell his father the reason why. His father was very angry and said to him, "I'm washing my hands of you." Now, this was the 60s, and Brendan took up with some hippies, English hippies, who'd come to live in their hometown. He got into drugs in a big way, hashish, LSD, and so on, and lost interest in everything. Eventually, the hippies left town, and his only local friend, who like himself was 15, died of an overdose. Brendan took off and went to London, lied about his age, and got a job. He spent all his wages on drugs and spent every weekend drugged out in a basement. One morning, his legs wouldn't move, but divine providence intervened as only God can and only God does, when precisely that morning, his sister, who lived in London, dropped by to visit him and found him in a terrible state. He was returned to Ireland and underwent 9 months of treatment, and at last was free of drugs. His father told him he was an embarrassment to him and shipped him off to join the army. To his utter amazement, he passed the physical and was accepted. He took to life in the army, became very fit, loved it, and excelled at it. And at 19 found himself with the UN buffer force in a buffer zone between Egypt and Israel in the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War. One morning, coming out of the barracks, he collapsed. This began happening frequently. He was diagnosed with grand mal epilepsy. He was told he would suffer from this for the rest of his life. With that, Brendan felt his life was now over. We'll now take up the interview where we left off last week.
I started doing accountancy, and I was doing really good at it. And I began to make money, and I found other ways of making money. It was tremendous. It was just developing on. I bought my car. Everything was going super well. But the only problem was that I was on very high medications, which was 60 milligrams of phenobarbital, something like 3 times a day, 100 milligrams of Epinutin, and all the Librium that they could give me to suppress these fits or these epileptic attacks. And of course, even in the midst of anything I did, I found, I was getting great respect. But the thing is that I was drinking at night. I'd go to a hotel and I'd drink at night. I could drink until 3 a.m. with my medications and so on. And I was deeply unhappy and didn't really know what to do. But what came into my head was that, that I felt such a depth, a bottomless pit, in other words, of darkness. And finally I said, okay, it's time to stop it, really. It's time to end it. And so one morning I was preparing for work, and I was looking into the mirror. I was putting on my shirt and tie. I had already been thinking about suicide, but I pushed it aside so many times. But I kept I remember saving up my medications a lot of bottles of medications I saved up. And I had just put them aside, but I had no intention that morning of doing any harm. I was quite okay. And just as I was fixing my tie, I said, "This is the day, right now." I think between the first thought and when that thought came into my head, I think it took only about 20 minutes. And I found myself taking out all of those medications. I knew exactly what they would do to me. I took out all of the phenobarbital, all of the stuff, put it all out there, and began to swallow it down. And until the taste was awful, I even crunched them. And I recall lying in the bed. And as I was lying in the bed, I said, I have 10 minutes. And I knew I had 10 minutes. I said, in the next 10 minutes, is there anything at all I can think of that would want to make me stay alive? And I recall that question really well. And I looked up and I could not think of one thing. Not one thing could I think of. So I closed my eyes for what I believe would be the last time, because the effect of these medications would be that it would actually stop your breath. It was like, it would just finish your breath. And so I closed my eyes, and there something happened. There was a guy who I'd known in London, Brian Fitzgerald, and he was a psychiatric nurse who would come home on holidays, and he came to see me that morning. And the landlord, I was upstairs, the landlord was downstairs, and he rang the bell, no answer. The landlord came out and said, "No, well, he's not at work. He has to be here." And eventually the landlord came up with him, opened the door of my apartment, came in and found me not on the bed, but curled up and twisted in the corner of the room, completely unconscious. And so they brought me to the hospital. It was an emergency situation. My heart stopped.
Oh my God.
And I would have died, except there was a student doctor. It was a lady who actually would not give up. She just would not give up. And she should have given up. She should have called time on it, but she didn't. She kept going, and sure enough, she got me going. And I was put into intensive care for several days. I don't know how long I was out of it, but when I did open my eyes, I was so disappointed and embarrassed also. And so the whole thing was that I was lying there, and they came in and they said, how lucky you are that you should. Nobody, they didn't witness anyone getting so much attention at the point of death as I had. And they said, you just came back, but that was it. So, but there was damage done, and I had a certain amount of brain damage from it, and certainly it affected my body in every way, psychologically, everything. And so I began to make terrible mistakes in my work. My memory was a bit blurred. I was making mistakes in my accounting. I was my voice very often would tremble, so I couldn't get my words out. And even walking down the street, sometimes my left leg would just stop and I'd fall over.
Oh my God!
And so I had real problems after it, and psychologically I was getting more paranoid all the time. So that's the state I was in. I was still working away, and come 1979, on the 2nd of September 79, my father, he just died suddenly at the front door. And a peculiar thing happened as he died. There was a priest who was Father O'Leary. He had been away on mission, and my father died at 5 minutes to midnight. And as he was dying, this priest was passing our door, passing his door, and administered the last rites to him. So
how good is God? Oh my God, what an amazing miracle!
How rare is it? Yeah, it was a miracle. And I didn't know that at the time, and I was kind of felt, a terrible thing to say, but I felt kind of a freedom after his death. and I was in a bad state myself, and then consequences to the family because of certain inheritance and so on. And so I just went my journey, and I had this just desire just to disappear, just to die and disappear. And then one day, two elderly ladies came to visit. They knocked on my door in my apartment. They said they were from the Legion of Mary, And I said, oh yeah, I at that stage, I was sarcastic. I was nasty. People didn't like me that well. I was just cheeky and smart and not a nice person overall, really. I had been, before I finished, I had gone to a company, and they asked me to move into this company and take it over and expand it. And they said, be ruthless in it, and don't take any prisoners there. And I was doing that. I was really nasty, and I was taking people out of business. And then what happened was that at that stage, these ladies called right in the middle. Actually, as I was doing harm to other people, really, without them even realizing it. These two ladies called to my door, and in the evening time, and they said they were from the Legion of Mary. So I said I'd have a bit of a laugh, and I brought them in, sat them down. They were telling me all about the Blessed Mother and Fatima and everything. I said, and they had these leaflets and a book on Sister Lucy of Fatima. And the more I heard them speaking, the kind of more angry I was getting, and I was containing it very well. And then finally I said to them, look, are you asking me to pray to God that even if he does exist, is the author of my misery? And they handed, with the rosary beads they handed me, I opened the window and flung the rosary bead out the window. And with that, the two ladies kind of disappeared fairly rapidly from my apartment, but left all their material on my table.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And so I sat back down to have a look at it, and I was gazing at it. At the time, now the Pope had already visited, Pope John Paul II. And in the office, I was saying, why are people going up to see that guy? I mean, we could be working, we could be making money, and you're going up to see this fellow. I said, it's awful stuff. And so I sat down, I read the material, and then I said, I'll write a letter to this Pope. And so I wrote a letter to the Pope, and I had all the classical ideas, how the church had suppressed the poor and kept them in fear and so on. And I wrote all that in one letter, and then I wrote a letter to Sister Lucy of Fatima. And I was saying to her, how dare you project your hallucinations on the Irish nation and all this kind of stuff. Rubbish, just pure rubbish. So I wrote it all, and I actually sent the letters, one to the Vatican, one to Fatima in Portugal. And because of my memory problem, I'd forgotten I sent them. And maybe a few weeks later, the first letter comes in my door from the Vatican, actually.
Good God. Good God.
It even had a wax seal in the back, And,
they were appointing you a cardinal. They were going to make you a cardinal.
Yeah, I was saying, what's this about, So I opened the envelope, and out falls a picture of John Paul II. I still have that. And a rosary bead. Would you believe it? There was a rosary bead in it. And a picture of John Paul and a letter. And I opened the letter, and it was signed by the Secretary of State for the Vatican. And there were only two words right in the center of the page. And it said, point noted. And that was it. And so I have this rosary bead from John Paul, from the Vatican, and I have the picture of John Paul. And within a day or two, the next envelope comes, and all the way from Fatima. It was a very plain blue envelope, thick, and I opened it, and out I saw this book came out on how to say the rosary, and a letter came with it. And the letter was signed. It wasn't written by Sister Lucy, but it was signed and written by Sister Mary of the Immaculate Heart in Fatima. And she began the letter by stating that Sister Lucy doesn't receive, letters from people and so on and so on, but she is aware of the content of yours. And she proceeded to say things to me that were touching me a little bit, because the author-rate letter that I had sent to her, this was no kind of response that I would have expected from somebody. It was gentle. I could feel the gentleness in her words. It was prayerful. It was kind, and then I thought, I was surprised by that, and I sat down and I opened this little book on how to say the Rosary, and at the very back of the book, it said that anything at all that you ask for through the Rosary will be given to you. So what I did was that I decided, and then in the front of the book, it showed you how to say the Rosary, and I didn't know how to say the Rosary. Can you imagine that? And I'm an Irishman, I had no idea. And so it showed you a graph on the front and how to say it, and it showed you all the pictures and the mysteries and so on. And the idea was that you would look at the picture, dwell on the picture and the mystery, and say your Rosary slowly, and say the Hail Mary slowly, and so on. Their Father and Hail Mary. And so I made a pact. I said, okay. I said, anything you ask for through the Rosary will be given to you. I said, I really will test this. So I asked for £100,000, and I think it was a brand new Mercedes Benz I wanted. And I honestly meant it, I honestly, truly meant it. I said, that's, I reckon the kind of life I had, that I'd be worth some compensation, and they were exactly what I asked for. And I know to an ordinary person who's scratching their head that it was crazy, but to me it made all the sense in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I was exactly the same. Exactly the same.
So I prayed devoutly, I may add, for about 2 weeks, being very careful not to make any mistakes, so that there'd be no excuses for me not getting it. And so after 2 weeks, there was no mark, and the 100,000 didn't come either. And so I put them away gently. I put them away. But about a week after that, this acquaintance of mine came to me and he said, Brendan, it was coming up near Pentecost Sunday in 1980. And he said, Brendan, there's a meeting down in the Mercy Hall in Mercy Convent. And he said, it's kind of a prayer meeting. And I immediately started laughing at him. And his name was Tom. I said, Tom, no, listen to me. I said, Tom, I don't pray, number one. And I said, secondly, I can't go into a crowd of more than 2 people without being drunk. And thirdly, I'm totally paranoid. I can't stick people. And he kept on at me, and he was irritating the life out of me. And sometimes you just say yes to get rid of somebody.
Yes. So
I said, well, I tell you what, Tom, I go all right. I said, if you put a chair at the end of the hall by the door, that I don't have to pass people or anything like that. Tom said, done, that's done. So on Pentecost morning, I had no intention whatsoever of going there, but I woke up early. And when I woke up, there are 2 things that I noticed that I'm sure I should have noticed before that, but I just noticed them that morning. The first thing I noticed was that the sky was blue. And the second thing I noticed were the birds singing. I hadn't taken any note of that before, but it was really strong with me that it was such a beautiful morning and the birds were singing and they were so, clear. So I began to, I dressed and I began to make my way down. It was an all-day meeting and I was making my way down to this Mercy Hall. If somebody was walking up one side of the street, I'd have to cross over to the other. I just couldn't look into people's eyes or anything like that. I was that bad. And so I finally made my way into this hall, And sure enough, when I went in there were about 600 or 700 people in there. They all had their hands raised in the air. They were praying in what we call tongues now, in different languages, and they were praising God and everything. And I was just absolutely blown away. I said, these people are crazy. This is a crazy place. And so I sat down at the chair was there at the end of the hall, right by the door. I sat down. I could see everybody from the back. And up at the top of the hall was a fellow called Michael Cullen. He was a lay person.
I was at school with him.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, we're in the Legion of Mary with him, actually.
Oh, my goodness. Well, Michael was there, and he was talking away and chatting away about God, and I couldn't figure out why there was a person, an ordinary man, a lay person there doing that. But I listened, and as I was listening to him at the beginning, I could feel the perspiration beginning. I was going into a panic attack. I could feel the perspiration just flowing out of me. And I said, oh, that's enough. I'm out of here now, So I stood up to go. And as I stood up, I could feel the pressure, a light pressure of two hands pressing on my shoulders. And I turned around, but it's just the wall there. But when I turned back, all the panic had gone. And perspiration had stopped, and I was able to sit down and listen. And there wasn't much I was taking in. I was just watching everything, but he was talking about God and so on. And then there came a time when a break occurred. There was a break. And as I said, I better get out first for this break. And at the time I was smoking cigarettes, and I said, I'd get out, go around the corner, have a cigarette while all these people are out doing their thing, and then go back in after maybe. And as I stepped out into the hallway, I noticed to my left there was a temporary confessional, a kneeler with a purple curtain on it. And an audible voice, I could hear a voice speaking to me, and the voice said, go there. And another voice nearly immediately said, don't. But before I even had a chance to make up my mind, I found myself kneeling on this kneeler. And now I had gone through the basic school things of communion, and I was Catholic, and I did communion, I did confirmation, kind of thing. That's it. And so I knelt there, and I didn't even know what was I doing there. And then the words came back to me from the time in school when we learned our catechism, and the words were, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's all my life since my last confession, Father." And there was silence, and the silence went for a little while, and then out of nowhere, this voice came. I'm certain it came from the priest, but it seemed like it came from somewhere else, and it just said, "Welcome back." And so, as he administered absolution to me, the weight of my life just lifted from my shoulders. Everything just lifted from me. The joy I felt inside of myself. And I didn't know anything about, healing, or had no idea what was going on down there, except that at that moment in time, all I know is that was the greatest thing that I've ever felt in my whole life.
Amen.
And in that sense, then, I felt just everything. That weight, when you don't have peace, a little peace is a lot of peace. And that weight just lifted from me. And that was everything. I know nothing about healing or anything like that. That would have been, if that's all that happened to me on that day, it would have been sufficient for the rest of my life. The sacrament of reconciliation, the forgiveness of Almighty God, the lifting of my burden, and the forgiveness of my sin. That would have been sufficient for me if that's all that would have happened on that day. But I got up and I went in and I sat down, and Michael began to speak about the promises of Jesus and the gospel, And suddenly, instead of touching my head and my ears, it started touching my heart and penetrated to the depths of my heart. And before the proceedings finished, I could see this man walking down the hall. He's passing all 600 or 700 people. He's passing right down the hall, and he's coming towards me, and I know he is. And so I kind of stand up before he gets to me, and he kind of looks at me, and he big smile on his face, and he said, can I pray with you? And I said, I kind of nodded and said yes. So he put his hands on my head. He began to pray, and sure enough, I rested in the spirit. I could feel my back bobbing off the wooden floor, but I didn't feel anything. And my eyes were closed. I tried to open them. I couldn't open them. I just was unable to open them. And then out of nowhere came that same voice that came before. And it was loud. I could hear it in my ears, normal voice. And the voice said, I have chosen you. You have not chosen me. And then it changed to a vision. And the vision that I could see was this man kneeling beside me in white robe with his left arm under my head. And then the vision switched, and I was looking right into his face and into his eyes most especially. And I realized that in his eyes, from his eyes, I just knew there was no judgment there. There was just pure love there. And there was no condemnation or judgment of any kind. And I realized that he wasn't looking at me. He was looking into me. And from that moment then, I saw tears that were flowing from his eyes. And I said to myself, I said, this is Jesus, and the reason why he cries is because of all the things I've done in my life that must have offended him or hurt him. And of course that voice then came again. The voice, the same as before, I could hear in my ear. And the voice said, my son does not shed tears of sadness. He sheds tears of joy because today you have allowed him the opportunity to snatch you from the pit.
Well, I'm afraid time has run out on us again. Next week, I look forward to having you back to hear the conclusion of my interview with Brendan Walsh. Don't forget that you can listen back to this interview and others on christianmediatrust.ie.